With Valaverse's second wave in their Action Force line comes a bevy of new figures, none of which feel like retreads, even in the one case where it's a second version of a Wave 1 character. With Wave 1, we had the leader, Condor. With this Wave 2, we are treated to Trigger, one of Condor's closest friends, and visually distinct from Condor immediately with the thick beard, Oakley-style sunglasses, and backwards cap. One of Valaverse's demonstrated strengths is their ability to deliver individualized sculpts on the good guy side of this military toy line, while keeping all of the figures within a believable tactical look. This is apparent when you put Trigger alongside two of his Wave 2 comrades, Duster and Rollout. While the figures each have a variety of standardized tactical gear, the various combinations applied to each character, along with other added personal touches, make the figures stand apart from one another nicely on display. Trigger gets camouflaged pants, Rollout has a uniform similar to Condor, but with more blue in the accessories, and Duster has a dark blue shirt as well as a unique helmet microphone setup, all in army green deco. Rounding out the new wave of good guys is the Valaverse exclusive Desert Rat, the codename being a subtle nod to the Palitoy Action Force range of the 1980s. As with the other figures, Desert Rat is uniquely sculpted. He comes dressed in British-style desert combat fatigues with a shema and his vest and gear. Allegedly, his entire sculpt is based on some real guy. They said it was this bloke. I have no idea who he is, but I'm glad he got an action figure. He was clearly a soldier in real life, so it's great Valaverse is basing some of its figures on real people.
You bitch.
If you line up Condor, Duster, and Desert Rat, you can see how unique each Valaverse figure is. If you wanted to, you could really make each character distinct by swapping out the provided alternate head for Duster, but it's the stuff of nightmares. It's well sculpted, but I can still see it when I shut my eyes. Like a what if Luigi from Super Mario Bros. Was a crazy saloon keeper in the Old West.
In here, we drink whiskey, so have yourself a snort. And then we're gonna go find that horse what done cheated me at poker. You doggy. First time a horse ever took me for a ride.
The last Wave 2 entry for the good guys is a second version of Sergeant Slaughter, now with web gear, a sleeveless vest, and optional marine cover in place of the campaign hat. This redeco really sets the second version of Sarge apart from the original. However, it also allows you to have a Sarge in the famous black tank top if you wish. If you choose to display him this way, but you'd like your original Wave 1 Sarge to stand out, a matching green marine cover came with Weapons Pack Bravo in the original Wave 1 assortment. There's a new troop builder in Wave 2 as well, the Delta Trooper, and his corresponding gear set. He goes nicely with the Riot Trooper, Urban Trooper, and Special Ops Trooper from Wave 1. I am curious that the Special Ops Trooper never had his own dedicated gear set. But hey, he's Special Ops, so he could be his own living weapon or something. All right, men, you have your orders. You know the objective. Riot Trooper, sound off. Bang your head. Metal health will drive you mad. Delta Trooper, sound off. I love to fly, and it shows. Urban Trooper, sound off. Sometimes even a cowboy's gotta swallow his pride. Spec Ops Trooper, you just keep standing there, looking beautiful. As far as bad guys are concerned, Valaverse gives us two new troop builders in Wave 2. The ground troops of the Swarm, called Scarabs, which have thicker body armor and a distinctive translucent honeycomb-textured head instead of just the large insect eyes of the Swarm Trooper from Wave 1. And we also get one of Karak's troop builder cronies, the Garrison Cavalry Trooper, with his almost medieval-style bucket helmet and dark red gear set. I want to just give him a sword and have him fight this Templar from Mythic Legions that 2 Cents Toys gifted me. I also managed to finally pick up the BotCon exclusive Wasp Raider, which pairs so well with the Swarm Trooper and really pops on the shelf.
You ever get the feeling like we're scraping the bottom of the barrel for new recruits these days?
Come on, man. Don't be such a pessimist. I mean,
Please, continue. You were saying?
Lastly, I grabbed the Joe Fest exclusive Sergeant Slaughter with the cloth jacket, signed by the man himself. While not one I'll be opening, it's great to have him to round out the current collection. All of these figures are great additions to the growing roster of Action Force's cast. And I should mention that as good as the build on the Wave 1 figures was, Valaverse has sorted those minor hip issues with Wave 2. The Wave 2 figures appear to be turnkey right out of the boxes, at least in my experience. Obviously, always be careful when first working with new figures. But with Wave 2, I didn't need a heat gun or hot water at all. Everything was pitch perfect in terms of joints and quality. And all of that is great. But what really makes Action Force work, what really makes it exciting, and what makes me think it's going to take off, is the fact that it's based around new characters with a new story behind them, and it's created by a company that had a clear vision of what it wanted to deliver to collectors. Valaverse isn't a group of disconnected marketing flacks with MBAs who know next to nothing about the products they're hawking while looking to get the next promotion. We see that all too often these days in the companies presently dominating the toy market, all of them playing the same tired card in the deck: nostalgia. Nostalgia is a tough habit to break. It's the devil we know. The echoes of a drug that was perfectly marketed to us in the 1980s. While these franchises and properties have become history and are therefore worthy of intellectual exploration and even saccharine reminiscing, the companies that own these rights and the aging fans who remember when these stories were new have forgotten a fundamental element that is essential in creating legends. You have to be a trend setter. All great stories broke the mold. They didn't mimic someone else's sculpture. Yet now we live in an era where stories not only chase the success of another, but in the toy industry especially, these companies are trying to outrun the long shadows of former glories with derivative iterations of the very characters that created these indomitable shadows to begin with. Either do something totally new or wholly reinvent a pre-existing idea at the concept level. The toy industry used to understand this simple tactic. The most prominent example was Hasbro's G.I. Joe. In 1982, they created a real American hero, totally apart from G.I. Joe's initial success in the 1960s and 70s as a 12-inch figure range of fighting men. Hasbro fused their philosophy of a detailed, articulated fighting man into the trends made popular by Star Wars of having an archetypal villain and smaller action figures for children to collect, while ensuring their toys leveled up the playing field with more engineering in the joints for posability than Kenner toys had ever considered. In that sense, G.I. Joe reinvented itself, but carried the best of its core ideas with it into an entirely new phase of its existence. Can we really say Hasbro has made such an attempt since? My point is, if we ever hope to see another legendary era of G.I. Joe, it will require Hasbro to abandon a real American hero the way they abandoned Kung Fu Grip and the Adventure Team in the 1970s. As it stands now, a few aging Gen Xers and Millennials are buying some new G.I. Joe action figures of legacy characters that serve to give them something of a fix for the memories of their youth. And that's fine on one level because so many toy collections were binned by parents or lost, so having something to remember your childhood isn't a crime. In fact, if Hasbro made the toys in the right quantities and made them easier to find, their nostalgic gesture would be quite nice. But even with that ideal scenario, G.I. Joe isn't exactly making waves anymore. It isn't the brand it once was twice over. It changed the toy landscape in the 1960s and did it again in 1982. It hasn't since. And the same can be said for Transformers, Star Wars, Masters of the Universe, and many others, because these properties now gaze almost exclusively inward. Say what you want about Beast Wars, but at least it was a bold new idea for Transformers. Even New Adventures of He-Man tried to set itself apart from the rest of the incarnations that shackle themselves to the same 15 characters, story beats, and settings. And yes, these lines ultimately failed, which could suggest the beginnings of the toy industry's creative retreat back to past glories, but nostalgia has a finite lifespan, and making the 50th Optimus Prime or Skeletor is a zero-sum game. Your customers will eventually stop collecting and then die off. That's the reality. Risks like Beast Wars are the only real way to achieve new victories in the toy space that will resonate and last. G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero was groundbreaking in its day, of 1982, but the reason they've never successfully made a G.I. Joe film, nor found any success relaunching the toy line to mass appeal, is because Hasbro stopped reaching past Real American Hero. As fun as ninja characters, Cobra terror organizations, and sailors with talking parrots are, they are firmly 1980s in their charms. You cannot update this idea while retaining its 1980s trappings. You either have to commit to a film set in 1982 and ride the line between nostalgia syrup and outright tongue-in-cheek farce, or you have to wipe the slate clean and start over.
Draw it again!
No ninjas, no terror organizations, not even any characters with the same names. Corporations don't know how to do that. They see something in their portfolio that was once successful, and so they stamp out softer copies again and again. At the same time, they want to bring these brands forward to make them relevant for modern audiences. But
it's a trap!
You can't have it both ways. By refusing to move away from Snake Eyes, Optimus Prime, and He-Man, you can never truly make their respective brands relevant in the present. Meanwhile, hype and nostalgia will only get you so far, because there's no actual fuel behind it. Just feelings. Feelings from an aging group of fans who will soon be on fixed incomes, but in their desperate want to keep things the way they remember it, they hold back the rest of the world. Tying G.I. Joe to Fortnite isn't a reinvention. It's a band-aid over a gaping wound, because Fortnite is the trendsetter now. And Hasbro wanted G.I. Joe to chase the new hotness rather than forge its own new path. Because unlike the people running Hasbro in the 1960s and in 1982, modern-day Hasbro doesn't know how to invent anything. And this problem isn't unique to Hasbro. A lot of companies are leaning on nostalgia these days, and the results are often middling at best. Whether it's a thin remake of the original Star Wars in a 2015 soft reboot, a Transformers film that's a prequel and sort of a reboot but not really and doesn't know what it wants to be, a Superman film that's a sequel and sort of a reboot but not really and doesn't know what it wants to be, a Ghostbusters film that's a sequel and sort of a reboot but not really and doesn't know what it wants to be, a Jurassic Park film that's a sequel and sort of a reboot but not really and doesn't know what it wants to be, or He-Man brought back allegedly for adults in a sequel that's sort of a reboot, but not really, in the most forgettable attempt yet. The evidence is clear that nostalgia as the reason for telling a story has a terrible track record. Nostalgia isn't a jet, it's a glider. The ground is going to keep getting closer. And most of the time we learn too late our glider was made from flimsy styrofoam, making the impact beyond brutal. Hasbro could have been looking at the world today and really considering how a military toy line could be relevant culturally. Instead, even as the world becomes more politically polarized, even as infrastructures around the world collapse under a myriad of socio-political conditions, even as sovereign nations are invaded by belligerent neighboring powers, Hasbro just doesn't see an opportunity for G.I. Joe beyond vapid nostalgia bait. But in truth, they saw it and ran from it. Corporate short-sightedness at its finest. In a world where we are now devoted to our troops and our veterans and supporting them, Hasbro was ironically uncomfortable with G.I. Joe as a military brand, and to this day prefers to keep giving us ninjas rather than something relevant to our day and time. Their predecessors in the company educated kids on the historical arms of the military in the 1960s, and then responded to the headlines of global terrorism coming out of events like the Iran hostage crisis with Real American Hero versus Cobra in the 1980s. That's why Valaverse Action Force is leaps and bounds beyond anything modern G.I. Joe has accomplished. It's a new and compelling mythology based in the challenges facing our contemporary world, with new characters we've never heard of before, confident in its allure through authentic storytelling rather than shallow nostalgia bait. At the same time, the toys themselves have pushed the limits of their scale to deliver figures of undeniable quality. Snakes and ninjas were great in the 1980s, and I love looking back and talking about a Real American Hero in its time with all of its quirks and victories and foibles. But Hasbro is still trying to employ those ninjas to sneak up on our emotions 40 years later. And it may be working for some, but it doesn't work on everyone, and it won't work forever. And it shouldn't. It's important to explore new things. It's healthy to put everything in its time and place. While Hasbro is still trying to ninja your aging feels, Action Force is kicking in the doors of nostalgia in a full frontal assault to wake us up from decades of mind-numbing repetitive marketing. We didn't love G.I. Joe as kids because it was a product line on repeat. We loved it because it was new and exciting and took chances with its story and products, pushing the boundaries of what we thought we knew a toy line to be. Hasbro isn't taking any chances with G.I. Joe. Not any real risks that show ambition. And you know it. If they knew how to make this property relevant for the modern day, and believed in it the way Hasbro believed in G.I. Joe in the 1960s and in the 1980s, they wouldn't have to crowdfund a single toy. Nor would they be leaning on 40-year-old characters for the umpteenth time. And if Classifieds had been all about nostalgic joy, they wouldn't have relaunched G.I. Joe with those Nerf Joes in the original Classified wave that used Real American Hero character names. Instead, they would have slam-dunked some nostalgia characters right from the off. They didn't hit the nostalgia mark out of the gate, nor reach for new heights with a reinvented franchise. And now they're scrambling with nostalgia bait out the ears, because they don't know what they're doing. and never knew what they wanted. Hasbro does a few half-hearted product layups and calls it ambition. Action Force? This is ambition. By the way, a link to Valaverse is in the description.